welcome. Today's conversation is a complex but important one that has lingered for decades. Often described as one of the oldest conflicts in Africa, President Macky Sall dubbed it Senegal's toughest problem when he came to power in 2012, promising measures to bring peace to a very troubled region. This is 2022. On March 13, the Senegalese military launched a new offensive against the fighters of the separatist group, Movement of the Democratic Forces of Casamance, MDFC, in the West African country's south, and the main objective is to dismantle the bases of the MDFC faction of Salif Sadio. Now, the Casamance conflict has festered for 4 decades, starting in 1982. The MDFC say they seek independence. Their agitation is fueled by discontent with the government's failure to develop and invest in the region. There is the ethnic and cultural differences with the rest of Senegal, as well as historical claims regarding geography and autonomy. It has left Casamance a land of abundant vegetation wedged between the Gambia to the north and Guinea-Bissau to the south, cut off from the rest of Senegal and suspended between war and peace. So far in this recent incursion by Senegalese military, an estimated 6,000 people have taken refuge in the Gambia after fleeing the violence as of Saturday, March 19th. Today on One Slot, we will attempt an understanding of the conflict. Are we dealing with a legacy of colonial partitioning, or is it cultural or ethnic differences? Why does it persist? Define peace efforts. Is the semblance of any resolution possible? My guest, Mark Deets, is a social and cultural historian of modern Africa with a research focus on the Senegambian region of West Africa. His research emerges from his diplomatic experiences in Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Cape Verde, working to bring about lasting peace in Senegal's Casamance region. He is an assistant professor of African and world history at the American University in Cairo. His work has been widely published. His book, A Country of Defiance, Mapping the Casamance in Senegal, is in the works. I want to say a very warm welcome and thank you for giving us your time on One Slot today.
Thank you, Felicity. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Literature suggests that several factors are at play here. Is it possible to explain the nature of the conflict between the Senegalese government and the Casamance region?
Yes, you're right. There are many factors. And, you know, a lot of scholars have tried to narrow down these factors to either ethnicity or religion, or perhaps to even a class conflict in some ways. But yeah, I think you have to really look at the whole. There are, of course, ethnicity is an issue. Of course, religion is an issue because it's one of the
Okay, I think we sort of lost
in Senegal, which is
okay. Go ahead. The network went off a bit.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm dealing with getting through Cairo traffic right now.
we will understand, and I hope our viewers will help us manage. Go ahead.
Yeah. So. Yeah, like I was saying, you know, it's hard to narrow it down to like just one factor. I mean, they all count, which is the reason that I take the approach of nationalism. Because I think nationalism gives us a way of thinking about multiple forms of identity that drive the conflict.
Okay.
You know, and then a part of, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you to expatiate a little. There are several factors. You could just maybe mention some of them. Okay, let's take the issue of geography for an instance. How important is
Sure.
it in this conflict?
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, you know, I think if you take a look at the map, you take a look at the geography, the maps that you've been showing there, it's not necessarily a mystery why this southern part of Senegal that's separated from the rest of the country by the Gambia, which was, you know, an country, which is then surrounded by this francophone Senegal. It's not hard. There's, you know, a division, a kind of separation between those two parts of the country. And so, yeah, this is a part of the colonial legacy of the colonial partition that leaves us with this sort of lock and key geography, if you will, of the Gambia kind of sticking into Senegal like a finger. I once had a Senegalese military officer tell me that it was like, you know, the Gambian finger poking them in the side of Senegal.
Okay, among the intellectual circles that clamor for autonomy for Casamance, they say that historically there is no, they were not part of the people that were colonized, basically. They say they had an agreement where they still maintained their autonomy. They even went as far as allege that the first president of Senegal actually signed some sort of agreement with the MDFC fighters to give them autonomy. When you look at that, is there some truth to it, or is them just trying to reach for something to confirm their rebellion?
Right, you're absolutely right that the separatists have claimed that there was this secret agreement between President Senghor, this was at independence in 1960, an agreement between President Senghor and Emile Badian, who was one of the leaders of this original version of the MFDC. And supposedly Badian had made an agreement with Senghor to, you know, emerge into independence in union with Senegal for 20 years. And then at the end of that 20 years, the Casamance was supposed to get its independence. But I have been looking for evidence of this agreement for the last 15 years. And I have found none in terms of written agreement. So the separatist claims the reason that that's the case is because destroyed a set of archives on the Casamance that would have, you know, provided this sort of document.
In its absence, how can they validate their claims, and basically how does it validate their claims if they don't have any evidence to show and they can't seem to trace back?
Right. Well, so they don't have documentary evidence, but what they do have is a discourse. You know, these myths and rumors about these kinds of secret agreements, they kind of match with the lived experience of some Casamance, who claim that they have always been kind of cheated out of colonial dispensation in relation to the Senegalese nation state. That they've always been cheated out of that, and that you know, they've been mistreated by this Islamo-Wolof nation in northern Senegal. And so, even though there's no documentary evidence for this agreement, this kind of experience that some Casamance have felt, you know, it resonates with them.
Yeah, beyond the existence of documents, I want to go back to what you said earlier about nationalism. Aside
Yes.
autonomy, there are other issues that they are agitating for. Could you maybe break down for us so the layman can actually understand when you talk about their fight for nationalism? This fight has gone on for 4 decades and there doesn't seem to be any resolution.
Right, right. Yeah, it's almost, the conflict is almost 40 years old now. And you're right that it still seems like you used that phrase in the introduction, neither war nor the way that a lot of observers have been describing this situation over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. Ni paix ni guerre en français, right? So they're, it's this sort of uncomfortable truce in a way, but the nationalist movement still has some traction, and it's been aggravated lately by just the involvement with the Gambia, and it's with the peacekeepers and the Senegalese sending their supposedly peacekeepers in after the issues with Yahya Jammeh refusing to step down from the 2017 presidential election.
Okay, regardless of the government in power, it doesn't seem that there's been any consideration to grant Casamance any autonomy. Why do you think this is so? Of what level of importance is Casamance to Senegal that is making the decision to even consider autonomy for Casamance not to be in play?
Well, the Senegalese are willing to talk about autonomy, but they're not really willing to to talk about any kind of independence. So the question is, with these discussions about autonomy, what does that mean? Autonomy in what regard? Is it going to be in relation to national security? Well, it's going to be in relation to sovereignty of certain territory. The answer is no. Is it going to be some kind of separate financial union? The Senegambian Confederation kind of illuminated some of the issues with these, which was, it was this attempt at union between Senegal and the Gambia to overcome this colonial partition, right? And so they tried this Senegambia Confederation from 1982 to 1989. However, these kinds of issues that had to do with autonomy, like you're talking about, sovereignty, basically led to the crumbling of that Senegambia Confederation then in 1989, because basically elites in both countries were not willing to, kind of give up the power that they had, and even though there were discussions about, some kind of economic union. Whenever it came to sovereignty and territory and national security, those were the sticky issues. And so if we define the nation state based on this need for security, this need for, kind of the Weberian state being defined as the legitimate monopoly of the use of force within a prescribed territory, those were the sticking points, and that's why this discussion of Casamance autonomy has never really gone that far.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the other thing that I was going to say about the sovereignty is that has also driven then the tactics for the MFDC fighters, who basically have been able to find sanctuary across the border in the Gambia or in Guinea-Bissau, to avoid to avoid entanglement with Senegalese armed forces. And the kinds of tactics that they've used in the past is basically using those international borders almost as a shield, and then coming across the border, punching the Senegalese military in the face, and then running back across the border, because they know that because the Senegalese state respects the borders of these modern nation states, they won't pursue them into that other country. Now that has not always been the case. I mean, there are cases of the Senegalese actually doing that, and the most recent case of it is now in the Gambia, right? Because you've got Senegalese troops in the Gambia because of that 2017 presidential election.
There are so many areas for us to cover. I would have loved to go back to the possibility of looking at what they had before, during the colonial times, the arrangement that they had then. It seemed to have worked, really. But let me just ask this one in the interest of time.
Okay.
The length of the war, it's been 40 years, and from all literature that I've seen, the vegetation and the land around there is very fertile. It's like the food basket, so to speak. That's what I hear.
Right.
And that's subject to confirmation from you, of course. How has this conflict affected Senegal?
Right. Well, so you're absolutely right that the Casamance, I mean, this is one of a part of the case for separatism, is this claim to being so different from Senegal. Different in terms of culture, different, that's where the religious discussion comes in sometimes because of that Catholic minority in a 95% Muslim country, but also different in terms of its landscape. So you're absolutely right that the Casamance is this green, fertile region. You know, it's very verdant and lush and green. And it's the one part of the country with rain-fed rice agriculture where that can actually work. And so you're right that the Casamance has been referred to as the granary of Senegal or the rice basket of Senegal. However, Vincent Fouché has shown, he's a French scholar who works on the history of the history and politics of the Casamance as well, and he and other scholars like Jean-Claude Maru have shown that actually Senegal gets more of its rice from Southeast Asia, that it was importing more of its rice. On the other hand, it's not exactly true that the Casamance is the only part of Senegal that grows rice, because there's also rice grown along the Senegal River Valley to the north. But that rice agriculture requires irrigation.
Okay, let me just interject quickly and look at a wider picture in the interest of time.
Okay.
Yes. Has there been any effect on Senegal as a whole as a result of this conflict? Because we're going to talk about, we've talked about the fact that it doesn't seem to affect the autonomy of Senegal in any way. But you can respond to that in 50 seconds so we can go on a break.
Yeah, sure. So how much has it affected the economy of Senegal? That's a good question. There's plenty. Probably the most important crop to Senegal has been peanuts or groundnuts, and those are raised primarily in the northern parts, closer to Dakar and Touba. But there's also plenty of peanuts raised in the south there, in the Casamance as well. And that was important not only to the French colonial economy, but it's also been important to the Senegalese economy since independence. So that would probably be the main crop besides rice that also plays a large factor.
All right, let's see if we can go on a quick break so you can set up your camera a little more, make it a little more stable. And when we come back, we'll be asking questions like, why have military offensive continued president after president, despite claims that the ultimate quest is peace in Casamance? Why is there a seeming lack of international attention? Mr. Deets will help us when we return from this break. Stay with us. It's very good to know you're still with us. Thank you for staying. This conversation is very important. We're talking about the conflict in the Casamance region, and I still have Mr. Deets with us. For a president like Macky Sall, who says he wants peace in the Casamance region, what do you make of his recent decision, the recent military incursion into the region?
Well, I believe that he does want peace. I don't think that anybody in Senegal is happy about this situation, about the continuing conflict. I think that in some ways they are not embarrassed, but they take a lot of pride in being one of the few African countries that has not suffered a coup d'etat since independence in 1960. And so this is kind of a stain on the national honor to some extent, that they have to continue to deal with this separatist movement when they're very proud of their democratic traditions. They're very proud of the free and fair elections that they've had and the peaceful transitions of power. Both from Leopold Senghor to Abdou Diouf in 1980, and then Abdou Diouf to Abdoulaye Wade in 2000, and then to Macky Sall, in 2012. So they're proud of this. I don't doubt that they want to solve this, but they've tried all kinds of strategies, right? They've tried both the stick and the carrot to some extent. Abdoulaye Wade, when he came into office in 2000, was saying that he was going to solve the Casamance problem in 100 days or less, and that did not happen. And then he tried a strategy of basically kind of paying people off to try to get them to agree to come to terms, and that didn't necessarily help, because it also creates kind of winners and losers to some extent.
Yeah, and there are even accusations that method fuels the what's the word now? The war economy of the crisis. People are benefiting from it, so. Right. Instead of being like a dowser, it just inflames the entire situation. But let's look at the region, the regional bodies, for instance, the AU, ECOWAS, and all of that. It seems this conflict has been confined within Senegal, and there's been no outside voices. Let's stay with the region for the moment. That seems concerned about the situation in Casamance. They've described this as a low-level conflict, but when you juxtapose that with the lives that are being lost and the people that have been displaced and the suffering that continues, it does not seem to add up. What's your thinking here?
Right. Well, I think that in some ways those discussions about the conflict being a low-intensity conflict and about it being not that bad, in some ways that's in relation to the rest of the region, right? So I mean that's kind of in comparison to civil wars in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire. and things like that. So I think you have to kind of put that in context. Obviously, if you're from one of the families of those more than 5,000 people who have died in the conflict, whether on the Senegalese side or the Casamance side, and a lot of Senegalese would object to me, making a distinction between the Casamance and the Senegalese, because for many of them, they're all Senegalese. But if you're from one of those families, obviously the loss is huge. It doesn't get much larger. And then when you talk about the continuous creation of refugees and internally displaced persons, this is another thing that it has been a real problem. How do you begin this peace process for these people when they have had to leave their homes, and in some cases other people have come in to take over the land that they left? Some of that land for many, many years has been polluted by landmines, so they can't even farm, what used to be the rice fields that was producing all of that rice that supposedly made the Casamance the rice basket of Senegal. Now you have military landmines that have been sown in some of those rice fields. So that's a real problem. And we're creating a new class of refugees, and right now with what's been going on in the Gambia.
I'm also asking about the involvement of regional bodies like the AU, right, which happens to be, Macky Sall happens to be the president. I mean, right, what role can they possibly play here?
Yeah. So definitely that's a huge deal. The Senegalese like to see themselves as leaders in Africa, and certainly in at least Francophone West Africa. I think they see themselves that way, again, because of this history of general political stability and the absence of a history of coups. They like to see themselves as a kind of a sub-regional leader in West Africa, one of the Francophone leaders of ECOWAS, and so it's certainly a regional issue to them, and it's certainly been a regional issue to the governments and to the people of the Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, because the conflict has spread, spilled over into both of those countries at various times.
I want to go back to one of the issues you raised about people that the government trying to use to pay the rebels off, basically. I want you to expand a bit on that conversation, because while I was reading for this conversation, I saw that war economy seems to deplete the urgency to end the conflicts.
That's right.
How vital is that issue to be addressed? Or do you think it's not as prominent as it used to be?
No, I think that it's still prominent. I know that it was certainly an issue when I was there as a diplomat in 2005. I got there to work at the U.S. Embassy in January of 2005, which was a month after the peace accord of December 2004 had been signed. And so there was the beginning of this program, partly in partnership, by the way, with the U.S. Agency for International Development, this peace building program. And there was money attached to this, and Abdoulaye Wade was using some of this money to kind of encourage people to come to the bargaining table, to engage in these conversations, to think about ways to move forward. But even back then, I think there was an awareness that in some ways, especially given the fact that people think of it as a low intensity conflict and conflict that's not that bad, that there was a thought that man, this is too good to give up for some people. And it's not just the Senegalese government, but also even certain NGOs and international workers like myself. You know, I was working for the U.S. government, but I was a part of that international community, right, of people who were to some extent benefiting from, like, you know, the NGOs, the international organizations, the people who are involved there. And so, yeah, there was this discourse going around even then that you know, all of this money that's attached to the program in one way or another, or to the conflict in one way or another, may not actually be helping to solve the conflict.
Yeah, there's also the question, you're talking about external factors now, aside those that are trying to, so to speak, talk about peace. There's also those that supply them with arms, and there's talks that if they don't have these supplies, if there are no persons or organizations or countries benefiting from the fight, it will just fizzle out on its own. How true do you think that would be in reality?
I think that could be true to an extent. I mean, but on the other hand, the conflict began with the MFDC only having, like, bows and arrows and you know, machetes and clubs, you know, very rudimentary weapons. And then, you know, the end of the Cold War brought in all these AK-47 automatic machine guns and landmines and rocket-propelled grenades, and all of a sudden the MFDC was able to get their hands on these kinds of weapons. You know, could you somehow starve the MFDC of weapons, and would that solve the conflict? I'm not so sure, you know, because that kind of indicates that you would somehow ignore the political situation. And I think that the political economic situation and the cultural grievances that are there are much more important than the weapons. I mean, I think that if the MFDC wants to find weapons, they're going to be able to find weapons. Especially with a weak state like Guinea-Bissau to the south, where there's been a lot of narco trafficking since 2005. You've had all kinds of money with these drug trafficking networks, you know, that have brought money and weapons into the region.
Let's talk about the people. I mean, they bear the brunt of some of all of this. You see the devastation, the displacement and all of that. And one of the issues that keeps coming up is the development, infrastructural, economic development that will allow the people to live sustainably. This is not available. When we're looking at peace in that region, is it possible with this conflict continuing? Is there any way within this conflict that people can have any measure of normalcy to live productive lives?
Yes, I mean, I would say that for the most part, the people who are still trying to make their lives in the Casamance, especially if they're not very close to one of the urban centers like Bignona or Ziguinchor, most of the people are kind of able to live their lives in a somewhat normal way. With that said, though, there are places where, because the MFDC is a guerrilla force that spends a lot of time in the forest, you know, there are some smaller villages and smaller communities, certainly, that have been affected by the conflict. For the most part, like I was saying earlier, those communities are along the borders, though. They're along those international borders. Which is where the MFDC, what is known as Atika, which is a Jola word for warrior, where those forces of Atika have taken up their positions. And what ways have they affected the lives of normal everyday people? Of course, they have attacked and killed people who they feel are kind of turning against them. But they also, they're a guerrilla force, and they don't have a huge supply train like the U.S. Army or something. So they have had to make part of their living from robbing the local population and abusing the local populations.
I'm itching to ask you more questions and have you expand on it, but we need to move ahead with the conversation and look for the solutions possibly in this very complex situation. The conflict has sentenced, the population to neither war nor peace, as we said earlier. When we return from this break, we'll look at why peace continues to elude. We've talked about some of it already. I will focus more maybe on how we can bring about a lasting peace. Don't go away. One major obstacle to the peace process, most literature suggests, is the existence of factions within the MFDC. I want to ask you, Mr. Deets, is it possible to talk about peace with all these factions? Is there maybe a faction that is more prominent that the government is talking with? Which faction, let me rephrase, which faction is the government talking with if we're looking at getting peace for the people?
Yeah, that's tough because the faction that they've been talking with lately is the faction of Salif Sadio, who is he's been the most consequential leader of the Maki of Atika that I was talking about earlier. When the Catholic priest, who was the de facto leader of the movement from the start of the violence in 1982 until his death in 2007, Augustin Jamakun Senghor, when he passed away, there was kind of a competition for who was going to assume the leadership of the MFDC at that point. And to tell you the truth, the guy who kind of emerged from all of that was Salif Sadio, because he's the guy with the guns. But there are other faction leaders. The issue is that anybody from Atika who has agreed to even talk to the Senegalese has been branded as a traitor and as a collaborator. Salif Sadio has been brought in by this Catholic group from Italy, the Sant'Egidio, he's become a part of these talks. There have been some people who have said that they think that's an indication that Salif is not as strong as he used to be. But Salif has, he's been in the forest with these rebels for a long time. And
is it possible that any agreement that the government maybe makes with Sadio will sustain and affect other people? Because if you look at it, there seem to be different demands from different factions.
Yeah, and that's been an issue. I think that's been the tough thing for the Senegalese government to deal with, is knowing who to talk to, especially since Father Jamakun died. And one of the things that the Senegalese state has insisted on was basically that the factions come together and designate one spokesperson with whom they can negotiate. And nobody has really been able to do that. The other guy who's essential to this in terms of the political wing of the MFDC is Mamadou Nkrumah Sane. He goes by the nickname Nkrumah, and he made a claim to this sort of political leadership, but he's in Paris. He's been exiled in Paris since the 1980s. So, he's been very much criticized by the Maquis, the guys in Atika. So it's really been challenging for the Senegalese government and the international community to know exactly who to talk to. In terms of like
you just mentioned something, the international community. I mean, how involved are they with the quest for peace in Casamance, really? Because so far it just seems most of the conversation is around what the Senegalese government is doing and the factions that we've been talking about, of course.
Yeah, the international community has been involved for quite some time. The French government has tried to play an interlocutor role, since this is dealing with a former colony of theirs. They made significant efforts in the 1990s, and those ended up going nowhere. In 1988 and to 99, the conflict worsened, became much more intense, a lot more people dying. And so then in the 2000s, the United States tried to assume this kind of leadership role. Eventually that didn't, I wouldn't say that it didn't go anywhere, but okay. Again, it was part of this peace building.
I'm being told we have less than 5 minutes, so I would quickly, okay. There are two important questions I would like your comments on. We talked about war economy and the role of the government. You said earlier that you feel that the government is really committed to the process of peace. What concrete steps have you seen from the government? I mean, what we are seeing now is an incursion, a military incursion. That does not, for a layman, signify that the government is actually going towards peace. How truly committed is the government of Senegal to the peace process? Please, if you can, respond in 40 seconds. I know we're really out of time. And I still have two questions for you.
Okay, sure. This has been a criticism from both people from the Casamance and also from the international community, saying that the Senegalese government is not really that committed because they haven't been willing to do what it takes to achieve peace. And what that has meant is that they haven't been willing to meet with all of the different factions at once, but because they have insisted on there being one single interlocutor to speak for the MFDC. And that has certainly been a problem since Father Jamakoun died, but even before that, even when he was still alive, it was still a problem.
All right. I want you to speak also on, from your experience, basically, the non-consideration of Casamance autonomy. I want to rephrase that question, the conversation we had earlier about autonomy. From your experience with this conflict, should independence really, not just autonomy now, be granted to the people of Casamance, or should Senegal try to set up something like a federal system in which the various arms would be shared, competencies rather, and powers would be shared among the different federated states? Is that an option worth considering?
I think any option is worth considering. I think that the Senegalese would probably say that they've tried this before, that they already have a federal system. They have different regions, but the separatists have said that the Senegalese government has actually used this administrative history to try to divide them, to try to divide and rule. So, it used to be kind of the natural region of the Casamance lying south of the Gambia, but those are two different regional governments now, with two different regional governors in Ziguinchor and Kolda. So the name Casamance has actually been taken off the Senegalese administrative map. It's, I think that the Casamance see kind of a level of cynicism there on the part of the Senegalese, and they're not sure how to move forward in that regard either.
what would be your, from your experience, suggestion for a more committed effort or process if we were to find peace in Casamance?
Well, as a historian, I normally beg your pardon on these kinds of things because we historians focus more on the past than we do offering solutions for the future.
But your knowledge will give. There's been different scenarios over the years that you can maybe point here and there to guide in the right direction.
Yeah, and they have this saying in the Casamance, in French, "On est fatigué." We're tired. We're tired of this. It's been almost 40 years. On est fatigué. They're sick and tired of this conflict and the ways that it's holding them back. But the Casamance continue to find reason to take offense at the ways that they're being treated by the Senegalese government and occasionally by their Senegalese countrymen. For example, it used to be, I don't know if this is still the case, there was a press story a few years ago about people from the Casamance landing at the airport in Dakar and then having to go through immigration. Why would you have to do that if that's your country? Right? So, I think that there are some little steps like that the Senegalese state could take. I also think that I understand the desire to have one sole interlocutor to speak with, but I think that they're probably going to have to be willing to meet with at least a group of people, if not groups of people to kind of work as interlocutors. In terms of the economic benefits of union, I think that the case can be made for peace and for prosperity for the Casamance. Some people would probably argue that the Casamance has received too much investment from the Senegalese government because of the rebellion in comparison to other parts of Senegal.
This conversation is a very lengthy one, and we're hoping that we can revisit it at another time with your kind acceptance to be our guest again. But for today, I want to thank you very warmly for giving us a little insight on the crisis and hopefully some suggestions for the future. Thank you.
Felicity, it's been my privilege to speak with you.
There's some fatigue with this conflict in Senegal, and like many and our guests have suggested, there has to be some resolution for the people. I can only say at this point, for the majority whose lives have been upended by the conflict, those who still remain displaced, all they seek is durable peace, enough to give them the opportunity to rebuild their lives in their cherished land. And like my guest said, lasting peace is possible, and we will here on One Slot continue the dialogue route until that happens. I want to thank you specially for staying to the end of today's program. I look forward to your company next week. Until then, I remain your host, Felicity Ezewuike. Bye for now.